After a night with his mistress, he returned home to find divorce papers and an empty nursery. The neon lights of downtown Houston cast long shadows across the hotel parking lot as Dominic Harris adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror. At 35, he still carried the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him everything he wanted. His wedding ring caught the light from the street lamp above, a golden reminder of the life waiting for him at home, and the lie he was about to live. "You're late," Elizabeth Moore purred as she opened the hotel room door. At 27, she possessed the kind of dangerous beauty that made smart men do stupid things. Her red dress hugged every curve, and her smile held secrets that could destroy marriages. "Traffic," Dominic lied smoothly, stepping into the room that smelled of expensive perfume and poor decisions. Elizabeth closed the door behind him, her fingers trailing along his arm. "I ordered champagne. We're celebrating tonight." "Celebrating what?" "Our future," she said, popping the cork with practiced ease. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. "I'm tired of being your dirty little secret, Dom. It's time to make this official." Dominic accepted the glass, his stomach tightening. "Beth, we've talked about this. Cynthia is 8 months pregnant. I can't just—" "Can't what? Leave a woman who doesn't appreciate you?" Elizabeth moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "When's the last time she looked at you the way I do? When's the last time she made you feel alive?" The truth was, Dominic couldn't remember. Cynthia had been different lately, distant, watchful, as if she was seeing something in him that he didn't want her to see. But that was pregnancy, wasn't it? Women got emotional, suspicious, difficult. "She's carrying my child," he said weakly. "And I could be carrying your next one," Elizabeth replied, raising her glass. "To new beginnings." They clinked glasses, the sound sharp and final. Meanwhile, 23 miles away in their 2-story colonial home, Cynthia Harris stood in the nursery she had spent weeks perfecting. The crib was assembled, painted a soft cream color that would work for any baby. Tiny clothes hung in the closet, organized by size. The name Oliver was painted in gentle blue letters above the changing table. At 31, Cynthia had learned to read the silences in her marriage. She knew the difference between Dominic's working late voice and his lying to your face voice. Tonight she had heard the latter. Her phone rang. Without looking at the caller ID, she knew it was him. "Hey, baby." Dominic's voice crackled through the speaker, accompanied by the sound of distant music and female laughter. "I'm going to be really late tonight. The client dinner is running long." "Which client?" Cynthia asked, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The Morrison account. You know how these things go." In the background, she heard Elizabeth's distinct laugh, bright, sharp, unmistakable. Cynthia had met her exactly once, at the company Christmas party 6 months ago. Elizabeth had shaken her hand while looking at Dominic like a cat eyeing a canary. "I made dinner," Cynthia said quietly. "Beef bourguignon. Your favorite. I know, and I'm sorry. Save me a plate, okay? I'll heat it up when I get home." Another burst of female laughter, closer this time. "Dom? Yeah? I love you." The silence stretched too long. "Love you too, babe. Gotta go." The line went dead. Cynthia stood there, phone in hand, feeling something inside her chest break open like an eggshell. But instead of crumbling, she felt something else emerge, something cold and clear and absolutely certain. She walked to her laptop and opened her email, scrolling to a message she had saved 3 weeks ago. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, specialist in family law. Cynthia had contacted her after finding hotel receipts in Dominic's car, receipts from nights when he claimed to be working late. "Mrs. Harris," Rebecca had said during their confidential consultation, "I know this is difficult, but you need to be prepared. Document everything, secure your finances, protect yourself and your baby." Now, as Cynthia listened to the silence of her empty house, those words felt like prophecy. She picked up her phone and dialed Rebecca's emergency line. "Rebecca? It's Cynthia Harris. I think it's time." Back at the hotel, Dominic's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it while Elizabeth freshened her lipstick in the bathroom mirror. "Dinner's getting cold. Missing you. See." "Work?" Elizabeth asked, noticing his expression in the mirror. "Just Cynthia. She's clingy lately." Elizabeth turned around, her eyes flashing. "She's your past, Dom. I'm your future. The sooner you accept that, the better." Dominic nodded, but something twisted in his gut. He thought about Cynthia at home, probably rubbing her back and wondering where he was. He thought about the nursery they had painted together, the names they had chosen, the life they had built. Then Elizabeth kissed him, and he stopped thinking altogether. Neither of them noticed the small recording device Elizabeth had hidden in her purse. Insurance for the day she would need to remind Dominic exactly how much he had promised her. Some investments required documentation. Miles away, Cynthia sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down account numbers, passwords, and the locations of important documents. The dinner she had made sat untouched on the counter, growing cold in the silence. She paused, her pen hovering over the paper, and looked around the home she had loved for 3 years. The throw pillows she had picked out, the family photos on the mantel, the small dent in the hallway wall where Dominic had bumped a piece of furniture during their move-in day. Tomorrow she would remember this moment as the last time she felt like this house was home. Tonight it was simply the place where her old life was ending and something new, something entirely her own, was about to begin. The baby kicked, as if sensing the change coming. Cynthia placed her hand over the movement and whispered, "It's going to be okay, Oliver. Mommy's going to make sure we're okay." Outside, the Houston skyline glittered with 1,000 lights, each one representing a life in progress, a story unfolding, a choice being made. Some choices built futures, others destroyed them, and some, like the one Cynthia was making as she picked up her pen and continued writing, did both. The morning sun filtered through the bedroom curtains as Cynthia Harris woke to an empty bed. The sheets on Dominic's side were cold. He had never come home. Her phone showed no missed calls, no apologetic texts, just silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands instinctively moving to her belly where Oliver was already stirring. 8 months and 2 weeks. Soon she would be bringing a child into this broken world, and that thought crystallized her resolve like nothing else could. Moving with purpose she hadn't felt in months, Cynthia showered and dressed in her navy blue maternity dress, the one that made her feel professional and capable. Today she would need both qualities in abundance. By 9 a.m. she was sitting across from Rebecca Martinez in a downtown law office that smelled of leather and fresh coffee. Rebecca, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, spread documents across her mahogany desk with the precision of a surgeon. "I've drafted the papers we discussed," Rebecca said, her voice gentle but firm. "Joint accounts will be frozen as of today. The house is in both names, but we can file for temporary exclusive use given your condition and his abandonment." "Abandonment," Cynthia repeated, testing the word. It felt accurate. "Texas is a no-fault divorce state, but his behavior supports our case for a favorable settlement. How are you feeling about this?" Cynthia looked out the window at the bustling street below, watching people hurry to their normal lives, their intact marriages, their predictable days. "I feel like I'm finally waking up." Meanwhile, across town, Dominic was experiencing his own awakening, a harsh one. He sat in his BMW outside his office building, staring at his phone. 7 missed calls from the bank. His credit card had been declined at the hotel restaurant when he tried to pay for breakfast. "What the hell?" he muttered, dialing his bank. "Mr. Harris?" "Yes, sir. There's been a freeze placed on all joint accounts this morning. You'll need to speak with your attorney." "My attorney? I don't have—" The line went dead. Dominic felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Inside the building, Elizabeth was waiting in his office, perched on his desk like she owned it. She had changed from last night's red dress into a sleek black suit that made her look predatory. "There's my successful man," she purred as he walked in. "Ready to tell the world about us?" "Beth, we need to talk." Dominic loosened his tie, suddenly feeling suffocated. "Something's happening. Cynthia's frozen our accounts." Elizabeth's smile faltered for exactly 1 second before transforming into something sharper. "Good. That means she knows. Now you can finally be honest about what you want. You don't understand. She's 8 months pregnant. I can't just—" "Can't what?" Elizabeth slid off the desk and moved closer. "Can't choose happiness? Can't choose me? Last night you said you loved me. Had he said that?" The night felt fuzzy around the edges, blurred by champagne and guilt. "I need time to figure this out." "Time?" Elizabeth's laugh was like breaking glass. "Dom, I've been patient for 6 months. I've been your secret, your side piece, your dirty little lie. But I won't be your maybe." She pulled her phone from her purse, swiping to a recording app. "Want to hear what you said last night about how your wife doesn't understand you? About how she's become cold and distant?" Dominic stared at the phone, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. "You recorded us?" "I record everything, baby. In my line of work, you learn to protect yourself." Elizabeth worked in marketing for a competing firm. a detail that suddenly seemed much more significant. Now, are you going to man up and make a choice, or do I need to make it for you? Back at the law office, Cynthia was signing her name to documents that felt like freedom papers. Each signature was deliberate, final, irreversible. There's one more thing, Rebecca said, sliding a folder across the desk. I had my investigator do some research on Elizabeth Moore. Cynthia's hand stilled on the pen. What kind of research? She's done this before. 2 other married men in the past 3 years. Both ended in messy divorces. Both men lost significant assets. Rebecca opened the folder, revealing photographs and bank records. She's not just an opportunist, Cynthia. She's a professional. The revelation hit Cynthia like a physical blow. Not only had Dominic betrayed her, but he had been played by someone who made a living destroying marriages. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. What happened to the other wives? Cynthia asked. One moved across the country with her children, started over. The other, well, she didn't handle it as well as you're handling it. Cynthia closed the folder. She had seen enough. I want to be gone before he realizes what's happening. Where will you go? Denver, my sister lives there. She's been asking me to visit for months. Cynthia stood, her decision crystallizing. I want to disappear completely. New life, new start. Rebecca nodded approvingly. I'll handle the service of papers. By the time he gets them, you'll be long gone. At 2 p.m., while Dominic was still arguing with bank representatives and Elizabeth was growing increasingly agitated, Cynthia was calmly packing a single suitcase. She chose practical items, maternity clothes, important documents, the ultrasound photos that showed Oliver's perfect profile. She paused at the nursery door, looking at the crib they had assembled together on a Sunday afternoon 3 months ago. Dominic had been so excited, talking about teaching Oliver to throw a baseball, to drive a stick shift, to be a real man. Now the empty crib looked like a monument to broken promises. Cynthia walked to the dresser and picked up the letter she had written at 5 a.m., when the house was dark and silent and honest. She placed it on Dominic's pillow, weighted down with her wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond that had once symbolized forever. The letter was short, direct, devastating. Dominic, you made your choice last night. Elizabeth's laughter in the background told me everything I needed to know. I won't compete for my own husband. I won't raise our son in a house built on lies. The divorce papers will be served tomorrow. Don't try to find me. You wanted freedom. Now you have it. Cynthia. By 4 p.m., Cynthia was at Hobby Airport, boarding a Southwest flight to Denver. She carried only a small carry-on and the baby growing inside her. As the plane lifted off, she watched Houston shrink below her, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months. Relief. Back at his office, Dominic finally managed to speak with a bank supervisor who confirmed his worst fears. Sir, your wife has legally separated all joint assets. She's entitled to do so. You'll need to establish individual accounts going forward. Elizabeth, who had been listening to his increasingly desperate phone calls, finally spoke. This is perfect. Now there's nothing holding you back from being with me. Dominic looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he saw something predatory in her smile. Beth, my wife just left me. She's pregnant with my child. This isn't perfect. This is a disaster. Your wife left you because she wasn't right for you. I am. Elizabeth moved closer, but something in Dominic's expression made her stop. Don't you dare blame me for this. You're the one who came to me. You're the one who said you wanted out. I never said I wanted out. I said I was unhappy. That's different. Elizabeth's mask slipped completely. Are you seriously going to crawl back to her now? After everything? She's having my baby. So have one with me. Elizabeth's voice rose, loud enough that other office workers glanced toward Dominic's glass-walled office. I can give you everything she can't. Dominic suddenly realized that everyone could see them arguing. His colleagues, his boss, the secretary who had worked there for 20 years and knew everyone's business. By tomorrow, the entire office would know about his affair. Lower your voice, he hissed. Don't you dare tell me to lower my voice. I'm not your dirty secret anymore, Dom. I'm your future. And if you can't see that, Elizabeth smiled, but it was sharp and cold. Well, maybe your wife wasn't the only one who needed a wake-up call. As she walked out of his office, Dominic noticed she was still holding her phone. The recording app was still running. That evening, Cynthia called her sister from her hotel room near the Denver airport. Synth? Oh my God, what's wrong? You sound... I left him, Melody. I'm in Denver. Can you pick me up? Of course. Where are you? What happened? Cynthia looked out her hotel window at the Rocky Mountains, purple in the distance. I stopped pretending that love was enough to fix what was broken. An hour later, as she hugged her sister in the hotel lobby, Cynthia felt Oliver kick strongly, as if he approved of their new direction. She had lost a husband and a home in a single day, but somehow she felt like she had finally found herself. Dominic's hand shook as he turned his key in the front door at 11:30 p.m. The house that had always welcomed him home now felt different. Too quiet, too still, like a museum after closing hours. "Cynthia?" His voice echoed through the hallway. No answer. The living room looked exactly as it always did. Her reading glasses were still folded on the coffee table next to a pregnancy book she'd been studying. The throw pillows were arranged the way she liked them. Everything was perfect and normal and completely wrong. He climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. "Babe, I know you're upset, but we need to talk." Their bedroom door was open. The lamp on her nightstand cast a warm glow across the bed, where a white envelope sat propped against her pillow like an accusation. His wedding ring lay beside it, the diamond catching the light in a way that made his chest tight. Dominic picked up the letter with trembling fingers. His name was written across the front in Cynthia's careful handwriting, the same handwriting that had filled their greeting cards, grocery lists, love notes tucked into his briefcase during their first year of marriage. He read it once, then again. The words seemed to rearrange themselves each time, but the message remained devastatingly clear. "Don't try to find me. No," he whispered to the empty room. "No, no, no." He ran to her closet. Empty hangers swayed gently, like wind chimes in a ghost town. Her side of the bathroom medicine cabinet gaped open, revealing nothing but dust outlines where her bottles and tubes used to sit. The nursery. Dominic stumbled down the hall to the room they had painted together, where they had argued good-naturedly about whether to hang the mobile over the crib or in the corner. The crib stood empty, the mattress bare, except for a single piece of paper. Divorce papers. Signed, filed, legal. He sank into the rocking chair they had bought for those late-night feedings that would never come, and called her phone. It went straight to voicemail, not the generic message, but her voice, warm and familiar. "Hi, you've reached Cynthia. I can't answer right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Cynthia, please," he said to her voicemail. "I know you're angry. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work it out. Please don't do this. Please don't take my son away from me." He called 5 more times. By the third call, the voicemail was full. Across town, Elizabeth was pacing her apartment, still wearing the black suit from earlier, but with her hair disheveled and her makeup smeared. She had been calling Dominic for 3 hours, and each unanswered call made her more frantic. She had invested 6 months in this relationship, 6 months of hotel rooms and secret lunches and carefully planned encounters. She had turned down other opportunities, a banker from Dallas, a real estate developer who'd been pursuing her relentlessly, because Dominic Harris was supposed to be her big score. Now his wife had outplayed them both. Elizabeth pulled out her laptop and began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard with manic energy. "Dom, I know you're dealing with a lot right now, but we need to talk. What happened today changes everything. I'm not going away. We're in this together now, whether you like it or not. I have recordings, remember? Of everything, don't make me use them. E." She hit send, then immediately regretted the threatening tone. She needed to be smarter than this, more strategic. Her phone rang, finally, but instead of Dominic's name, the caller ID showed Marcus Williams, her ex-boss from 2 jobs ago, the married man who had left his wife for her, only to discover that Elizabeth had been documenting their affair to use against his company in a sexual harassment lawsuit. "Elizabeth." His voice was cold, formal. "Marcus, why are you calling me so late? I thought you should know. Word is getting around about you and Dominic Harris. About your pattern." Elizabeth's blood went cold. "What word?" "The wives talk to each other, Elizabeth. Cynthia Harris contacted my ex-wife, and Patricia's been in touch with other women. They're comparing notes. Patricia, wife number 2 in Elizabeth's campaign of matrimonial destruction. A soft-spoken teacher who had spiraled into depression after discovering her husband's affair, losing 30 pounds and requiring medication to sleep. "You can't prove anything," Elizabeth said, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. "I can't. But they can. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, phone records. They've been busy." Marcus paused. You picked the wrong wife this time, Elizabeth. Cynthia Harris isn't falling apart like Patricia did. She's fighting back. The line went dead. Elizabeth stared at her phone, feeling something she rarely experienced: fear. Back at the house, Dominic was opening and closing kitchen cabinets like a man looking for proof that his life wasn't really over. The refrigerator still hummed. The coffee maker was still programmed for 6 a.m. Her favorite mug, the one that said "baby loading" with a progress bar, sat in the dishwasher waiting to be run. He found the beef bourguignon in the refrigerator covered with plastic wrap. A note was attached. "Your favorite. I made it with love. See." The irony hit him like a slap. While Cynthia was home cooking his favorite meal, he was in a hotel room with another woman, planning his future as if his wife and unborn child were nothing more than inconvenient obstacles. His phone buzzed. Elizabeth's text. Reading it, Dominic felt the last pieces of his denial crumble. She wasn't his lover. She wasn't his salvation. She was his blackmailer, and he had been too stupid and arrogant to see it. He called her back, and she answered on the first ring. "Dom? Thank God. Where have you been?" "She's gone, Elizabeth. My wife is gone. My son is gone. Are you happy now?" "I'm sorry she's gone, but I'm not sorry you're free. We can be together now." "Isn't that what we wanted?" "What we wanted?" Dominic laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "I never wanted this. I wanted to have my cake and eat it too. I wanted to be married and single at the same time. I wanted to be a good husband and a cheating bastard simultaneously. Well, now you can just be with me. Don't you get it? I don't want to be with you. I wanted to sleep with you, but I never wanted to build a life with you. You were supposed to be temporary." The silence on the other end stretched so long that Dominic thought she had hung up. When Elizabeth finally spoke, her voice was different. Harder, colder. "Temporary," she repeated. "Interesting choice of words for someone who told me he loved me last night. I was drunk. I have it recorded. Your voice very clear, very sober, telling me that you loved me, and that your wife didn't understand you the way I did." "Elizabeth, you want to know what's temporary, Dom? Your comfortable little life, your reputation, your job. Because if you think you can use me and throw me away like I'm some kind of prostitute, you're about to learn how wrong you are. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. See, while you were lying to your wife about working late, I was working. I was documenting everything. Every lie you told her, every promise you made me, every detail about your company's clients that you shared during our pillow talk." Dominic's mouth went dry. Had he talked about work with her? He must have. Men always talk too much after sex, especially when they were trying to impress a younger woman. "You wouldn't," he said, but even as he said it, he knew she would. "Your wife left you because she has dignity. I'm not leaving you because I don't. Which one of us do you think is more dangerous?" Elizabeth hung up, leaving Dominic alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of the life he had destroyed. He looked at the beef bourguignon again, at Cynthia's loving note, and finally understood what he had lost. Not just a wife, not just a child, but a woman who had loved him enough to cook his favorite meal while he was betraying her with someone who had been planning his destruction from the very beginning. Outside, it started to rain, one of those sudden Houston storms that came from nowhere and changed everything in minutes. The sound of water against the windows was the only sound in the empty house, washing away the last pretense that anything would ever be the same again. In Denver, Cynthia was sitting in her sister's guest room, feeling Oliver move restlessly inside her as she listened to the same storm system that was soaking Houston. She had turned off her phone after the 6th voicemail from Dominic, not ready to hear his voice break as he realized what he had lost. Tomorrow, she would start looking for an apartment. Next week, she would find a job. In a month, she would give birth to a son who would grow up knowing that his mother had chosen dignity over desperation, strength over submission. Tonight, she was simply grateful for the silence. 3 days after Cynthia's disappearance, Dominic sat in his office staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, a grandmother who had worked at the firm longer than anyone could remember, knocked softly on his door. "Mr. Harris, your 10 o'clock is here." "Cancel it," he said without looking up. "Sir, it's Mr. Blackwell, the senior partner." Dominic's stomach dropped. Richard Blackwell didn't make courtesy visits. When the founding partner of Blackwell, Stone and Associates requested a meeting, careers either soared or ended. "Send him in." Blackwell entered with the quiet authority of a man who had built his law firm from nothing into a Houston powerhouse. At 62, he still commanded every room he walked into, his silver hair and custom suits giving him the appearance of someone who had never lost a case or made a poor decision. Dom. He sat down without being invited. We need to talk. If this is about the Morrison account, this is about Elizabeth Moore. Dominic felt his world tilt. Sir? Word travels fast in this city, especially when it involves one of my attorneys, and a woman who specializes in seducing married men. Blackwell's voice was calm, conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. Did you know she used to work for our competitors at Morrison and Associates? The Morrison account. The client dinner. Dominic realized with sick clarity that there had never been a Morrison account. Elizabeth had used the name of a competing firm to provide him with a cover story. Richard, I can explain. Can you? Because I've spent the last 48 hours doing damage control. Your wife's attorney called our biggest client yesterday. Apparently, Mrs. Harris is concerned that privileged information might have been compromised during your relationship. Dominic's mouth went dry. Cynthia called your clients? No, her attorney did. Very professionally, very discreetly. Just checking to make sure their confidentiality hadn't been breached. Blackwell leaned forward. Dom, I've known you for 8 years. I promoted you. I trusted you with my most important cases. Please tell me you didn't discuss client matters with this woman. The truth was, Dominic couldn't remember what he had discussed with Elizabeth. Those hotel room conversations were a blur of wine and ego-stroking and post-coital confessions. Had he mentioned the Peterson merger, the Rodriguez real estate deal? He honestly didn't know. I need to think. You need to resign. The words hit Dominic like a physical blow. Richard, please. My wife just left me. I'm about to be a father. I need this job, and I need to protect this firm. Your personal life has become a liability we can't afford. Blackwell's tone softened slightly. I'm not firing you, Dom. I'm giving you the chance to leave with dignity. Take a month to get your affairs in order. We'll say you're taking time off for family reasons. A month? And then what? Then you find another job, preferably in another city. After Blackwell left, Dominic sat in his office feeling like a man watching his life burn down in real time. His marriage was over. His career was ending. His unborn son was 1,000 miles away. His phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. Dinner tonight? I have news that will make you very happy. Meanwhile, in Denver, Cynthia was sitting in a sunny cafe near her sister's house, sipping decaf and reviewing apartment listings on her tablet. At 35 weeks pregnant, she moved more slowly than she used to, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months. This one looks nice, Melody said, pointing to a 2-bedroom unit with a mountain view. The school district is excellent, and it's only 15 minutes from my place. Cynthia circled the listing. Her sister looked so much like her. The same dark hair, the same green eyes. But Melody had something Cynthia was just beginning to rediscover. Lightness. The ability to laugh without calculating the cost. Have you thought about what you'll tell Oliver about his father? Melody asked gently. The truth. Age appropriately, but the truth. That his father made choices that hurt people, and that sometimes loving someone means protecting them from those choices. And if Dominic fights for custody? Cynthia had been dreading this question for 3 days. Then we'll deal with it legally, but he'd have to find us first. Her phone rang. A Denver number she didn't recognize. Hello? Mrs. Harris? This is Dr. Jennifer Reeves at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. I'm calling to confirm your appointment for next Tuesday. I'm sorry? Your OB/GYN appointment? Your sister called yesterday and explained your situation. We have an opening with Dr. Martinez if you'd like to transfer your care here. Cynthia looked at Melody, who was suddenly very interested in her coffee cup. You called a doctor? You're 8 months pregnant, Cynth. You need prenatal care. For the first time since leaving Houston, Cynthia felt tears welling up. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she wasn't alone. Yes, she said to Dr. Reeves. I'll take the appointment. Back in Houston, Dominic met Elizabeth at an upscale restaurant in the Galleria district, the kind of place where privacy came with the price of the meal. She looked radiant in a red dress that made every man in the restaurant notice her arrival. You look terrible, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear today. Elizabeth reached across the table and took his hand. Poor baby. Bad day at the office? I'm being forced to resign. Her hand stilled on his. What? Apparently sleeping with you was a career-limiting move. Who knew? Dom, I'm sorry. I never meant for your work to be affected. Didn't you? He studied her face, looking for signs of the calculating woman who had threatened him over the phone. Today she seemed genuinely sympathetic. Because I'm starting to think nothing about our relationship was accidental. Elizabeth's eyes flashed just for a moment, before her expression returned to concerned innocence. What's that supposed to mean? It means I know you used to work for Morrison and Associates. I know there never was a Morrison client dinner. I know you've done this before with other married men. Done what? Fallen in love? Destroyed families for sport? Elizabeth pulled her hand back as if he had slapped her. Is that really what you think of me? I don't know what to think anymore. My wife is gone, my job is over, my life is in ruins, and you're sitting there in a new dress looking like you're about to celebrate something. Maybe because I am. Elizabeth's mask slipped completely, revealing the predator underneath. Your wife did us a favor, Dom. She removed the last obstacle between us. There is no us. There never was an us. There was just me being stupid and you being opportunistic. Opportunistic? Elizabeth laughed, but it was sharp and humorless. I prefer strategic. Do you want to hear my news or not? Dominic's stomach clenched. What news? I'm pregnant. The restaurant seemed to go silent around them. Dominic stared at Elizabeth, certain he had misheard her. What? 3 months. I just confirmed it this morning. She smiled, but it was triumphant rather than joyful. Congratulations, Daddy. You're going to have 2 children after all. That's impossible. We always used protection. Protection fails sometimes, especially when someone wants it to fail. The implication hit Dominic like a freight train. You planned this. I planned for this. There's a difference. Jesus Christ, Elizabeth. Do you hear yourself? You intentionally got pregnant to trap me? I intentionally got pregnant to give us a future together. Your wife left you, Dom. Your old life is over. This is your chance to start fresh, with someone who actually wants to be with you. Dominic stood up so abruptly that other diners looked over. I need to go. Sit down, we're not finished. Yes, we are. We're finished. Whatever this was, whatever you think this is, it's over. Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried the weight of a threat. Sit down. Something in her tone made him comply, but his hands were shaking with rage and fear. Good boy, she said sweetly. Now listen carefully. I'm carrying your child. That makes me family, and family sticks together, especially when they have so much to lose. What do you want? I want you to stop pretending that your wife was some kind of saint and I'm some kind of villain. She abandoned you when you needed understanding. I stayed when things got complicated. That should tell you something about who really loves you. Dominic looked around the restaurant, at all the normal people having normal conversations about normal problems. A year ago, he had been one of them. Now he was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, sitting across from a woman who had orchestrated his destruction and was calling it love. I need time to think, he said. Of course you do, but don't think too long. Elizabeth stood, smoothing down her dress. I'll call you tomorrow. We have a lot to plan. She left him sitting alone with the check and the slowly dawning realization that his problems had just gotten infinitely worse. In Denver, Cynthia was unpacking her few belongings in her new apartment, a bright, airy place with a view of the mountains and a nursery that caught the morning sun. Oliver was due in 3 weeks, and for the first time in months, she felt ready to meet him. She had no idea that her ex-husband was about to become a father twice over, or that the woman who had destroyed her marriage was planning to make that destruction permanent. All she knew was that tomorrow, she would start her new job as a receptionist at a pediatric clinic, and that Oliver would grow up in a place where love was honest, and futures were built on truth rather than lies. Some endings were actually beginnings in disguise. The labor pains started at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late October. Cynthia woke in her Denver apartment to the familiar tightening sensation she had read about but never experienced. Outside her bedroom window, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the mountains with white. Melody, she called softly to her sister, who had been sleeping on the couch for the past week, unwilling to leave Cynthia alone as her due date approached. Is it time? Melody was instantly alert, grabbing the hospital bag they had packed and repacked 3 times. I think so. Cynthia breathed through another contraction, counting the seconds the way Dr. Martinez had taught her. They're 7 minutes apart. As they drove through the quiet Denver streets, Cynthia felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. For 8 months, she had carried Oliver while her world fell apart and rebuilt itself. Now, finally, she would meet the little person who had been her constant companion through the worst and best days of her life. Are you scared? Melody asked as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. Not anymore, Cynthia said. and realized she meant it. Meanwhile, 1,100 miles away in Houston, Dominic was experiencing his own kind of labor pains, the agony of watching his life contract around him with no relief in sight. He sat in the empty house that used to be his home, surrounded by legal documents that painted a clear picture of his financial ruin. Without his job at Blackwell, Stone and Associates, he couldn't afford the mortgage payments. The divorce settlement would claim half of everything anyway. And now, with Elizabeth's pregnancy, there would be child support for 2 children, one he desperately wanted to know, and one he wished had never been conceived. His phone rang. Elizabeth, of course. She had been calling every day for 2 weeks, alternating between sweet manipulation and veiled threats. "Good morning, baby daddy," she purred when he answered. "What do you want, Elizabeth?" "I want to know if you've thought about what we discussed, about moving in together, about being a real family." Dominic rubbed his temples. "I told you I need more time." "Time for what? To figure out how to crawl back to a wife who doesn't want you? Face it, Dom. I'm your future now. You're my mistake. There's a difference." Elizabeth's voice hardened. "Your mistake is carrying your baby. Your mistake is the mother of your child. Your mistake has recordings of every promise you made, every lie you told your wife, and every confidential detail you shared about your clients. Are you threatening me again? I'm reminding you that we're in this together, whether you like it or not." As Elizabeth hung up, Dominic felt the walls of his world closing in. He had become a prisoner of his own poor choices, and his jailer was a woman who smiled while she destroyed him. At Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital in Denver, Cynthia was in active labor, surrounded by people who cared about her well-being rather than her utility. Dr. Martinez, a kind woman about Cynthia's age, coached her through each contraction with patience and encouragement. "You're doing beautifully," Dr. Martinez said. "I can see his head. A few more pushes and you'll meet your son." Melody held Cynthia's hand, tears streaming down her face. "He's almost here, Synth. Oliver's almost here." With a final, tremendous effort, Cynthia brought her son into the world. Oliver James Harris arrived at 2:47 p.m., weighing 6 pounds, 11 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced his displeasure with the cold, bright world he had just entered. "He's perfect," Dr. Martinez said, placing the squirming baby on Cynthia's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Cynthia looked down at her son, not theirs, because Dominic had forfeited his right to claim this moment, and felt a love so fierce and protective that it took her breath away. Oliver opened his eyes and seemed to look directly at her, as if he had been waiting 9 months to finally meet the woman whose heartbeat had been his lullaby. "Hello, baby," she whispered. "I'm your mama. I'm going to take such good care of you." As she held Oliver for the first time, Cynthia felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. She wasn't Dominic Harris's abandoned wife anymore. She wasn't a victim of betrayal or a woman starting over. She was Oliver's mother, and that identity filled all the empty spaces in her heart that Dominic's lies had carved out. Back in Houston, Dominic was meeting with a bankruptcy attorney named Gerald Phillips, a tired-looking man who specialized in helping people navigate financial disasters. "How bad is it?" Dominic asked, sliding a folder of documents across the desk. Phillips reviewed the papers with the clinical detachment of someone who had seen it all before. "Pretty bad. Between the divorce settlement, potential child support, and your loss of income, you're looking at liquidating most of your assets. The house will have to be sold. After the mortgage and legal fees, you might walk away with enough for a security deposit on an apartment." Dominic felt physically sick. "And my 401k? Half goes to your ex-wife as part of the settlement. The other half, well, early withdrawal penalties will eat up most of it." "Jesus." "Mr. Harris, can I ask you something? Off the record?" Dominic nodded. Was it worth it? The question hit harder than any legal document or financial projection. Was 6 months of hotel rooms and stolen afternoons worth losing everything he had built over 15 years of marriage and career? "No," Dominic said quietly. "It wasn't worth any of this." That evening, as snow continued to fall outside the Denver hospital, Cynthia sat in her private room holding Oliver while Melody took pictures with her phone. The baby was nursing peacefully, his tiny fingers wrapped around Cynthia's thumb with surprising strength. "Have you thought about what you'll tell people when they ask about his father?" Melody asked. "I'll tell them he has the only parent he needs," Cynthia said, stroking Oliver's soft hair. "Some children have 2 parents who love them. Some have 1 parent who loves them enough for 2. And some have 2 parents who are too busy destroying each other to love anyone. Do you think Dominic will try to find you?" Cynthia considered this. She had made it deliberately difficult, changed her phone number, used her maiden name on all the apartment paperwork, even gotten a post office box instead of using her real address. But determined people could always find ways to locate someone if they really wanted to. Maybe. But if he does, it will have to be through lawyers and courts and official channels. I won't make it easy for him to waltz back into our lives when it's convenient. And if he wants to be part of Oliver's life, then he'll have to prove he's changed, that he's capable of putting someone else's needs ahead of his own desires, that he can be trusted. Cynthia looked down at her sleeping son. And frankly, I don't think he can. Meanwhile, in Houston, Elizabeth was having dinner with her mother, Gloria Moore, at an expensive steakhouse downtown. Gloria, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s, had raised Elizabeth to view relationships as business transactions and men as investments with varying rates of return. "So this Harris man," Gloria said, cutting her filet with surgical precision, "he's unemployed now? Temporarily. He's very well connected in the legal community. Darling, unemployed lawyers are like unemployed actors. There are thousands of them, and most will never work again." Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. "He'll find something. And his wife? She's definitely out of the picture?" "Completely. She moved to Colorado and filed for divorce." Gloria smiled approvingly. "Good. Wives have a way of complicating things. But tell me about his assets." "Well, there's the house, which will be sold to pay for the divorce. And his savings, which will be split with the ex-wife. And his earning potential, which is currently zero." Elizabeth realized where this conversation was heading. "Mother, I'm not a gold digger." "Of course you are, sweetheart, we all are. The only question is whether you're mining in the right location." Gloria leaned forward. "This man has cost you your reputation, your social standing, and potentially your career. What exactly has he given you in return?" "A baby." "Babies can be had from much more solvent fathers." Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. "Are you suggesting I'm suggesting you consider your options while you still have them. You're 3 months pregnant, not 3 years married. Cut your losses." That night, Elizabeth lay awake in her apartment, one hand on her still flat belly, thinking about her mother's words. She had always prided herself on being strategic, on choosing her targets carefully, but Dominic Harris was turning out to be fool's gold, shiny on the surface but worthless when subjected to pressure. Maybe it was time to cut her losses. Maybe it was time to find a man whose life she could improve rather than someone whose life she had destroyed. In Denver, Cynthia was learning to nurse Oliver in the quiet darkness of her hospital room, marveling at how quickly she had adapted to this new rhythm of need and fulfillment. Outside, the snow was still falling, covering the city in clean white silence. For the first time in almost a year, Cynthia felt genuinely hopeful about the future. She had a healthy son, a supportive family, and a job waiting for her when she was ready to return to work. She had traded a husband who betrayed her for a child who would love her unconditionally. It seemed like a very good trade. As she drifted off to sleep with Oliver in her arms, Cynthia whispered a prayer of gratitude for the courage to leave, the strength to start over, and the wisdom to know that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what really matters. In Houston, Dominic sat alone in his empty house, staring at his phone and wondering if he had the courage to try calling Cynthia one more time. He knew she had probably changed her number. He knew she didn't want to hear from him. But somewhere out there, his child was about to be born, and he was going to miss it because of choices that seemed increasingly incomprehensible with each passing day. He never made the call. Some moments, once lost, could never be recovered. 2 months after Oliver's birth, Cynthia had settled into the rhythm of single motherhood with a grace that surprised even her. Her Denver apartment had transformed from a temporary refuge into a real home. Baby toys scattered across the living room, tiny clothes hanging on a drying rack by the window, and the sweet scent of formula and baby powder that seemed to cling to everything. Oliver was thriving. At 8 weeks old, he had already outgrown his newborn clothes and developed a personality that swung between angelic contentment and dramatic indignation when his needs weren't met immediately. Cynthia found herself talking to him constantly, narrating their daily routines as if he were the most fascinating conversationalist she'd ever encountered. "And now we're going to make breakfast," she told him as he lay in his bouncy seat, watching her move around the kitchen with serious, dark eyes that reminded her of her own father. "Not the fancy brunches Daddy used to make on Sundays, but scrambled eggs are perfectly respectable." She had returned to work at the pediatric clinic 3 weeks ago, and Dr. Sarah Chen, the head pediatrician, had become both a boss and an unexpected mentor. The work was satisfying in a way her previous job at the insurance company had never been. Here, she was helping parents navigate the small crises and large fears that came with raising children. "You're a natural with the anxious mothers," Dr. Chen had told her yesterday. "They trust you immediately. Maybe because I understand what it's like to feel like you're doing everything wrong," Cynthia had replied. Now, as she prepared Oliver's morning bottle, her phone rang. She didn't recognize the Houston number, but something made her answer. "Cynthia, it's Rebecca Martinez, her attorney." Cynthia's stomach tightened. "Rebecca, is everything okay? I wanted to give you a heads up. Dominic's attorney contacted me yesterday. He's asking for information about your whereabouts." Cynthia sank into her kitchen chair, Oliver gurgling happily in his seat, oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the room. "What kind of information?" "Nothing specific. Just general questions about whether you're still in Texas, whether you've established residence elsewhere. I didn't provide anything, of course, but I thought you should know he's looking for you." "Why now?" "I'm not sure, but there's something else you should know. Word is getting around Houston legal circles that Dominic's in serious financial trouble. House is going into foreclosure. He's been interviewing for positions at smaller firms, the kind that handle car accidents and workers' comp claims." Cynthia felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness. She had never wanted Dominic to suffer exactly. She had just wanted him to understand what he had thrown away. "Is there anything I need to do legally?" "Not unless he files for custody or visitation rights. But Cynthia, if he does find you, don't make any agreements without talking to me first. Men who have lost everything can be unpredictable." After hanging up, Cynthia looked at Oliver, who was now making soft cooing sounds at the mobile hanging above his seat. "Your daddy's looking for us, little man. But don't worry. We're not hiding. We're just living our own life now." Meanwhile, in Houston, Dominic was sitting in his car outside Elizabeth's apartment building, working up the courage to go upstairs. He hadn't seen her in 3 weeks. Not since their last disastrous dinner where she had accused him of being emotionally unavailable, and he had accused her of being completely insane. But desperation had a way of making even insane people seem reasonable. With his house in foreclosure and his savings account approaching zero, Dominic had started to think that maybe Elizabeth was right. Maybe they should be together. Maybe two broken people could somehow make one functional life. He climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, rehearsing what he would say. He would apologize for being distant. He would acknowledge that she was carrying his child. He would suggest they find a place together, pool their resources, try to make it work. Elizabeth answered the door wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Without makeup, she looked younger, more vulnerable. For a moment, Dominic remembered what had attracted him to her in the first place. Not just her beauty, but the way she had seemed to see potential in him that even he didn't recognize. "Dom, what are you doing here? We need to talk." "I'm kind of busy right now." "Beth, please, I've been thinking about what you said. About us being a family. About making this work." Elizabeth's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked almost like pity. "Oh, Dom, you're about 3 weeks too late." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, she stepped aside to let him into the apartment. That's when Dominic saw him, a man about his own age, sitting on Elizabeth's couch in an expensive suit, reading the Wall Street Journal like he belonged there. "Dominic, this is Trevor Mansfield," Elizabeth said with the casual tone she might use to introduce her mailman. "Trevor, this is Dominic Harris." Trevor stood and extended his hand with the confident smile of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Nice to meet you, Dom. Elizabeth's told me a lot about you." Dominic shook the man's hand automatically, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." "Trevor and I met at a charity function last month," Elizabeth said, settling onto the couch next to Trevor with an intimacy that made Dominic's chest tight. "He's in private equity, specializes in tech startups." "Congratulations," Dominic said, still not understanding why he was being introduced to Elizabeth's new friend. "Dom," Elizabeth's voice was gentle, almost kind. "I'm not pregnant anymore." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "I terminated the pregnancy 3 weeks ago." Dominic stared at her, certain he had misheard. "You... what?" "I made a choice. About my future, about what kind of life I wanted to build, and that life doesn't include being tied to someone who's lost everything. You killed our baby. I ended a pregnancy that would have been a mistake for both of us." Elizabeth's voice remained calm, reasonable. You have nothing to offer a child, Dom. No job, no money, no prospects. I couldn't bring a baby into that kind of instability. Trevor cleared his throat. Maybe I should give you two some privacy. No, stay, Elizabeth said, placing her hand on his arm. Dom was just leaving. Dominic looked back and forth between them, finally understanding the full scope of his situation. Elizabeth hadn't just ended their relationship, she had erased it completely, as if the past 8 months had been nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. So that's it, he said. You're just moving on? I'm moving up, Elizabeth corrected. There's a difference. What about everything you said? About loving me? About us having a future together? Elizabeth exchanged a look with Trevor, who was watching this exchange with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly entertaining drama. Dom, I did care about you, in my way, but caring about someone doesn't mean accepting their limitations forever. Their limitations? You had a wife, a job, a life. I thought I could improve all of those things for you, but when your wife left and you lost your job, Elizabeth shrugged. Well, it turned out there wasn't much left to improve. The casual cruelty of her words left Dominic speechless. This was the woman he had thrown away his marriage for, the woman he had believed loved him enough to build a life together. Get out, he said quietly. Dom, get out of here. Now, before I say something I'll regret. Elizabeth stood, smoothing down her sweater. There's no need to be dramatic. We had some good times together, let's leave it at that. Good times? Dominic felt something break open inside his chest. Not his heart, which had already been thoroughly destroyed, but something deeper. His sense of reality, maybe. His understanding of human nature. You destroyed my marriage. You cost me my job. You threatened to blackmail me. And now you're telling me it was all just good times? I didn't force you to cheat on your wife, Elizabeth said, her voice finally showing some heat. I didn't make you share confidential information. You did those things because you wanted to, because you thought you deserved more than what you had. I deserved better than you. Trevor stood up, his friendly demeanor evaporating. I think it's time for you to leave, buddy. Dominic looked at this stranger, this well-dressed, successful man who represented everything Elizabeth really wanted, and felt the last of his illusions crumble. He had never been Elizabeth's lover. He had been her placeholder, keeping her entertained while she waited for someone better to come along. You're welcome to her, Dominic told Trevor, but watch your back, and maybe don't share any business secrets over pillow talk. He left them standing in the living room together, walking down the stairs and out into the Houston heat that felt suffocating after the air-conditioned apartment. In his car, he sat for a long time, not sure where to go or what to do next. Elizabeth was gone. The baby was gone. His marriage was gone. His job was gone. His house would be gone within a month. For the first time since this nightmare began, Dominic found himself thinking not about what he had lost, but about what he had thrown away. Cynthia, who had loved him despite his flaws, the child she was carrying who would have been born by now, the quiet happiness of a life built on something real, rather than the cheap excitement of something stolen. He pulled out his phone and dialed information. Denver, Colorado. I need a number for Cynthia Harris. I'm sorry, sir, but that number is unlisted. Of course it was. Cynthia wasn't stupid. She had protected herself and their child from exactly this moment. The moment when he would realize what he had lost and come crawling back. That evening, as Dominic sat in his empty house eating takeout Chinese food and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from nothing, Cynthia was giving Oliver his evening bath in her cheerful Denver bathroom. The baby loved bath time, kicking his legs and smiling at the warm water. Your daddy probably knows about you by now, she told Oliver as she gently washed his hair, and someday he might try to find us. But you know what? By then you'll be so loved and secure that it won't matter what he wants. You'll know where you belong. Oliver gurgled and reached for a floating rubber duck, his chubby fingers grasping at the yellow toy with determined concentration. That's right, baby boy. Keep reaching for what makes you happy. That's the most important thing Mama can teach you. Outside, the Denver winter was crisp and clean, full of possibility. Inside, Cynthia's small apartment was warm with the kind of love that could only exist when it was freely given and gratefully received. Some stories ended with grand gestures and dramatic reconciliations. This one was ending with quiet contentment and the simple pleasure of a mother and child discovering each other, one small moment at a time. It was, Cynthia thought as she wrapped Oliver in a soft towel, exactly the ending they both deserved. 6 months had passed since Dominic's humiliating encounter at Elizabeth's apartment, and the ripple effects of their affair had spread through Houston's legal community like wildfire. What had started as whispered gossip had evolved into open discussions about ethics, professional conduct, and the dangers of mixing personal drama with business relationships. Dominic now worked at Hartwell and Associates, a small firm in a strip mall that specialized in personal injury cases and DUI defenses. It was honest work, but a far cry from the corporate law prestige he had once enjoyed. His office was a windowless room barely larger than a closet, and his clients were more likely to pay in installments than in full. "Harris, you've got to walk in," called Janet, the receptionist who doubled as paralegal, bookkeeper, and office manager. At 65, she had seen dozens of lawyers cycle through smaller firms, and she treated each one with the same maternal skepticism. The woman waiting in the small lobby looked nervous, clutching a worn purse and glancing around as if she might bolt at any moment. She was about 40, with tired eyes and the kind of careful posture that suggested life had taught her to expect disappointment. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm Dominic Harris. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm not sure this is the right thing to do, but I heard you might understand." They sat in his cramped office, and Mrs. Coleman explained that her husband had recently confessed to an affair. He said it was with someone named Elizabeth Moore, that she worked at some marketing firm. Dominic felt his chest tighten. "When was this?" "About 3 months ago. Right after she moved on from you." The timeline made sense. Elizabeth must have targeted Mrs. Coleman's husband immediately after securing Trevor Mansfield as her new primary option. It was both calculating and surprisingly reckless. "What happened to your marriage?" "We're trying to work it out. My husband, Paul, he's a good man. He said she made him feel like he was special, like he was the most interesting person she'd ever met." Mrs. Coleman's voice broke slightly, but then she just disappeared. Stopped answering his calls, changed her number. He was devastated. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure how I can help. I want to know if she did this to other people. Paul thinks he was special, that what they had was real. But I think she does this regularly." Dominic leaned back in his chair, considering how much to reveal. "There have been others, yes. But Mrs. Coleman, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "I want my husband to understand that he wasn't chosen because he was special. He was chosen because he was available." Meanwhile, across town in River Oaks, Elizabeth was having brunch with Trevor Mansfield at the exclusive country club where he maintained a membership. The dining room overlooked perfectly manicured golf courses, and the other patrons were the kind of people who appeared in the society pages of Houston magazines. Elizabeth looked stunning in a white sundress that showed off her tan and her figure. At 28, she had perfected the art of appearing both innocent and sophisticated, depending on what the situation required. "The Blackwood Foundation Gala is next month," Trevor was saying as he cut into his eggs Benedict. "I thought you might like to attend with me." "I'd love to," Elizabeth replied, though privately she was calculating how much visibility the position would provide and whether it would help establish her as Trevor's serious girlfriend. "There's just one small thing," Trevor continued, his tone shifting slightly. "I ran into Marcus Williams at the club yesterday. Apparently you two know each other." Elizabeth's hand paused on her mimosa glass. Marcus Williams, her previous relationship, the one that had ended badly when his wife had discovered their affair. She had moved on quickly after that, but Houston's social circles were smaller than she had anticipated. "Marcus and I dated briefly last year," she said carefully. "After his divorce, it didn't work out. He mentioned that. He seemed surprised to hear we were together." "Surprised how?" Trevor studied her face. "He suggested that you have a pattern of getting involved with men who are going through difficult times. Said I should be careful." Elizabeth felt a familiar chill of recognition, the moment when her carefully constructed image began to crack. "Trevor, Marcus was bitter after our breakup. He wanted something more serious than I was ready for." "Of course." Trevor nodded, but something in his expression had shifted. "I just wanted to mention it." After brunch, Elizabeth drove home feeling unsettled. Houston was supposed to be a big enough city to avoid these kinds of complications, but the upper-class social circles she targeted were surprisingly interconnected. She called her mother as soon as she got to her apartment. "There's a complication," she said when Gloria answered. "What kind of complication?" "Trevor's friends are starting to talk about my dating history." "Which friends?" "Marcus Williams, for one, and probably others." Gloria was quiet for a moment. "Elizabeth, how many men in Houston's business community have you been involved with?" "It's not that many. 4, maybe 5. "In how long?" 3 years. Sweetheart. Even in a city the size of Houston, that's enough to create a reputation. Elizabeth sank onto her couch, the weight of her choices finally becoming clear. She had been so focused on individual relationships that she hadn't considered the cumulative effect of her pattern. What do I do? You have 2 choices. You can try to marry Trevor quickly before the gossip gets worse, or you can cut your losses and start fresh somewhere else. I don't want to start over again. Then you'd better hope Trevor values what you bring to his life more than he values what his friends think. In Denver, Cynthia was enjoying the kind of ordinary Saturday afternoon that had once seemed boring, but now felt like a luxury. Oliver, now 8 months old, was sitting in his high chair, systematically demolishing a banana while she cleaned the breakfast dishes. Her phone rang, a Houston number she didn't recognize. Hello? Cynthia, this is Janet Coleman. I got your number from, well, it's complicated, but I think we have something in common. I'm sorry, I don't understand. My husband had an affair with Elizabeth Moore. I heard that your ex-husband, that she was involved in your divorce too. Cynthia sat down heavily at her kitchen table. Mrs. Coleman, I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish. I just want to understand. Was she planning this? Did she target married men deliberately? I think she did what felt right for her at the time, Cynthia said carefully. But Mrs. Coleman, I've moved on from all of that. I have a new life now. I'm trying to move on too. But my husband keeps talking about her like she was the love of his life, like their connection was special. Cynthia looked at Oliver, who was happily making a mess with his breakfast, and felt a wave of gratitude for the distance she had put between herself and all that drama. Mrs. Coleman, the best thing you can do is focus on your marriage, not on her. Whatever Elizabeth is or isn't, whatever she did or didn't plan, none of that matters as much as whether you and your husband can rebuild trust. Do you think that's possible? After something like this? I think every marriage is different. Mine couldn't survive it, but that doesn't mean yours can't. After hanging up, Cynthia lifted Oliver from his high chair and carried him to the sink to clean his sticky fingers. He babbled happily as she washed his hands, his chubby legs kicking with excitement. The phone call had been a reminder of the life she had left behind, the complicated web of hurt and betrayal and second-guessing that came with trying to understand why people made the choices they made. But understanding wasn't the same as healing, and sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to let someone else's choices define your future. Back in Houston, Elizabeth was discovering that reputation was like credit, easy to damage and hard to repair. Over the next few weeks, she noticed subtle changes in how people responded to her. Invitations that didn't come, conversations that stopped when she approached, the kind of social freeze-out that happened slowly and then all at once. Trevor was still seeing her, but less frequently. Their conversations had become more careful, more polite. The easy intimacy they had shared was being replaced by the kind of formal politeness that signaled the beginning of the end. Elizabeth realized with growing panic that she had made a critical error. She had been so focused on managing individual relationships that she had forgotten that all relationships existed within a larger social context. Houston's business and social elite were a community, and communities had long memories for the people who disrupted them. For the first time in her adult life, Elizabeth was facing the real possibility that her actions might have permanent consequences. Some mistakes could be charmed away with the right smile and the right story, but some mistakes became part of who you were, following you regardless of how far you tried to run from them. Elizabeth was about to learn which kind of mistake she had made. Fall had arrived in Houston with its promise of cooler weather and fresh starts, but for Elizabeth Moore, the season brought only the growing realization that her carefully constructed social life was crumbling around her. She sat in her apartment on a Friday evening, scrolling through Instagram stories of parties and events she hadn't been invited to. The Houston social circuit that had once welcomed her was now moving forward without her, and each passing week made her absence more noticeable and more permanent. Her phone had been unusually quiet for the past month. Trevor's calls had become infrequent, then polite, then non-existent. The last time they had spoken, he had used the dreaded phrase, "I think we need some space," the kind of diplomatic rejection that men learned in business school. Elizabeth poured herself a glass of wine and tried to remember the exact moment when everything had started to unravel. Was it the conversation with Trevor about Marcus Williams? The awkward encounter at the charity luncheon where two women had literally turned their backs to her mid-conversation? Or had it been building for months without her noticing? Her reflection was interrupted by a knock at the door. Through the peephole, she saw a young woman she didn't recognize, mid-20s, professionally dressed, holding what appeared to be legal documents. "Elizabeth Moore?" the woman asked when Elizabeth opened the door. "Yes. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a reporter with Houston Monthly magazine. I'm working on an article about relationship patterns in Houston's business community, and I was hoping to ask you a few questions." Elizabeth felt her stomach drop. "I'm sorry. I don't think I'm the right person to speak with. Actually, I think you might be exactly the right person. I've been speaking with several people about the interconnected nature of Houston's social circles, and your name has come up repeatedly." "In what context?" Sarah consulted her notepad. "In the context of relationships with Marcus Williams, Paul Coleman, Dominic Harris, and Trevor Mansfield, all within the past 2 years." Elizabeth gripped the doorframe. "I don't see how my personal relationships are relevant to a magazine article. When personal relationships intersect with business relationships, they become matters of public interest, especially when there's a pattern that affects multiple families and professional reputations. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you the opportunity to tell your side of the story. The article is being written regardless. The question is whether you want to participate or let others define the narrative." Elizabeth closed the door without another word, but she knew the damage was already done. If Houston Monthly was writing about her, it meant the whispers had reached a level where they were considered newsworthy. She called her mother immediately. "They're writing an article about me," Elizabeth said as soon as Gloria answered. "Who's writing an article?" "Houston Monthly. About my dating history. About the pattern." The silence on the other end was longer than Elizabeth had expected. "Mother? I told you Houston was getting too small for your activities. It's 4 men in 2 years. It's not like I was sleeping my way through the entire city. 4 men in the same social circle, Elizabeth. That's the equivalent of sleeping your way through a small town. What do? You pack, tonight, and you find a new city. I can't just leave. I have a lease, a job. Jobs can be replaced. Leases can be broken. Reputations once destroyed are much harder to repair." After hanging up, Elizabeth walked through her apartment looking at the life she had built over the past 3 years. The expensive furniture, the carefully curated artwork, the closet full of designer clothes that had been purchased with the credit cards of men who had wanted to make her happy. It had all felt so sophisticated, so adult. She had convinced herself that she was simply taking advantage of opportunities that presented themselves. Men wanted to spoil her. Why shouldn't she let them? If their marriages were unhappy, wasn't she providing a service by giving them excitement and attention? But looking at her empty Friday night, her silent phone, and the prospect of packing up her life to start over in a new city, Elizabeth began to understand the true cost of her choices. Meanwhile, in Denver, Cynthia was experiencing her own Friday evening, but hers was filled with the comfortable chaos of single motherhood. Oliver, now 10 months old, was pulling himself up on furniture and babbling in the language that only he understood. The apartment was scattered with toys, and Cynthia's hair was slightly disheveled from a day spent chasing after an increasingly mobile baby. She was heating up leftover soup for dinner when her phone rang. Dr. Chen from the clinic. "Cynthia, I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. Is everything okay?" "I have some news. Doctor, Martinez is retiring next month and we're looking to expand our patient services. I was wondering if you'd be interested in training as a medical assistant. It would mean more money and more responsibility." Cynthia looked around her small apartment at the life she had built from nothing. A year and a half ago, she had been a pregnant woman fleeing a broken marriage with no clear plan for the future. Now she was being offered a career opportunity based on her own merit and hard work. "I would love that," she said. "Excellent. We can start your training next week. There is one thing, though. You'd need to update your emergency contact information for HR purposes. Currently, we just have your sister listed. That's fine. Melody can stay as my contact. And for Oliver, we'll need someone local listed as his emergency contact as well, in case something happens to you." The question made Cynthia pause. In Houston, Dominic would have been the obvious choice. But here in Denver, she had built a life that was entirely her own. Melody lived an hour away, which wasn't practical for emergencies. "Can I think about it and get back to you?" "Of course. There's no rush." That evening, as Cynthia gave Oliver his bath, she reflected on how completely their lives had changed. In Houston, she had been part of a couple, part of a marriage, part of a social structure that had defined her identity. Here she was simply herself, Oliver's mother, a valued employee, a neighbor who helped the elderly woman downstairs with her groceries. "You know what, baby boy?" she said, as Oliver splashed happily in the warm water. Sometimes starting over is the best thing that can happen to you, even when you don't choose it. Oliver gurgled and reached for his floating toys, his dark eyes bright with simple joy. He had no memory of the house in Houston, the father who had never held him, or the marriage that had ended before he was born. For him, this apartment, this life, this version of his mother was all he had ever known. It was enough, more than enough. Back in Houston, Dominic was working late at the small law firm, reviewing case files for a car accident lawsuit that would probably settle out of court for a modest sum. The work was honest but uninspiring, and the cases rarely involved more than basic paperwork and phone calls. His phone rang. His mother, calling from San Antonio. "Dom, I just wanted to check on you. It's been a while since we talked." "I'm fine, Mom. Just working." "And how are things? With the job situation?" Dominic's parents knew about the divorce, but he had never told them the specific reasons why Cynthia had left or how he had lost his position at Blackwell Stone and Associates. As far as they knew, the marriage had simply grown apart, and his career change had been voluntary. "The job is fine. Different from what I was doing before, but fine." "And have you heard from Cynthia? About the baby?" This was the question Dominic had been dreading. His mother had been excited about becoming a grandmother, and explaining Oliver's absence from their lives required admitting to failures he wasn't ready to discuss. "Cynthia and we're not in contact right now, Mom." "What does that mean?" "Dominic, that's your son. I know what he is." "Then why aren't you fighting for him?" "Because I destroyed my marriage for a woman who didn't even want me," Dominic thought but didn't say. "Because I made choices that can't be undone, and Cynthia has every right to protect herself and our son from the mess I created." "It's complicated," he said instead. "Children aren't complicated, Dom. They need their fathers." After hanging up, Dominic sat in his empty office, surrounded by files about other people's problems, other people's mistakes, other people's attempts to rebuild after disaster. He thought about Oliver, who would be walking soon, maybe saying his first words. He thought about Cynthia, who had been strong enough to leave when staying would have meant accepting an unacceptable situation. And he thought about Elizabeth, who had taught him that wanting something didn't justify taking it, and that some prices were too high to pay, even when you didn't realize you were paying them until the bill came due. In her apartment, Elizabeth was packing methodically, folding clothes into suitcases and bubble-wrapping picture frames. She had made her decision. Dallas was only 4 hours away, big enough to disappear into, prosperous enough to offer opportunities. But as she packed, she found herself thinking not about the future, but about the past, about the moment she had first seen Dominic at that company Christmas party, married and stable and ripe for the kind of attention she specialized in providing. It had seemed so simple then. Men wanted excitement. She provided excitement. Everyone got what they needed. She hadn't considered the wives, the children, the families that would be affected by her pursuit of what she wanted. She hadn't thought about the fact that Houston's business community was essentially a small town where everyone eventually knew everyone else's business. Most importantly, she hadn't considered that her own choices would eventually isolate her from the very community she had been trying to infiltrate. Some lessons, Elizabeth realized as she taped up another box, could only be learned through experience. And some experiences came with consequences that followed you regardless of how far you ran from them. But running was what she knew how to do, so she packed and planned and prepared to start over once again. Older, maybe wiser, but still fundamentally unwilling to examine the pattern that had brought her to this point. Some people learned from their mistakes. Others simply moved to new cities and hoped for different results from the same choices. Elizabeth had always been better at geography than introspection. 3 months into her Dallas exile, Elizabeth Moore had secured a position at a prestigious marketing firm in the Arts District and a sleek apartment overlooking Clyde Warren Park. From the outside, it appeared she had successfully reinvented herself once again. New city, new job, new social circles that knew nothing about her Houston history. But old patterns, Elizabeth was discovering, had a way of asserting themselves regardless of geography. She stood at her bathroom mirror on a Tuesday morning, applying lipstick with the precision of someone preparing for battle. Today was the day she planned to make her move on James Whitmore, the married partner at Hamilton and Associates, who had been showing interest in her since she'd started at the firm. "Morning, Elizabeth," James said as she passed his office, his wedding ring catching the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." I have those campaign revisions you requested. Excellent. Would you mind bringing them to lunch? I know a quiet place where we can discuss them properly. Elizabeth smiled, the expression carefully calibrated to suggest professional enthusiasm, with just a hint of personal interest. I'd be happy to. As she walked back to her desk, Elizabeth felt the familiar thrill of the chase, the intoxicating sense of power that came from knowing she could make a married man risk everything for her attention. The fact that James had 2 teenage daughters and a wife who taught yoga at the community center didn't factor into her calculations. Those were his problems to manage, not hers. But even as she planned her strategy, a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her how the Houston situation had ended. The isolation, the whispers, the professional embarrassment of having to flee in the middle of the night. She pushed the thought away. Dallas was different, bigger, more anonymous, with social circles that didn't overlap the way they did in Houston's business community. Meanwhile, 925 miles away in Denver, Cynthia was experiencing her own professional milestone. She walked through the pediatric clinic wearing scrubs for the first time, a medical assistant badge clipped to her pocket, feeling a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion of her. Ready for your first day in your new role? Dr. Chen asked as Cynthia reviewed the morning's patient schedule. More than ready. Cynthia had completed her certification program while working part-time and caring for Oliver, a juggling act that had tested her limits, but proven to herself what she was capable of achieving. Her first patient was a worried mother with a fussy 6-month-old baby. As Cynthia took the infant's vital signs and gently reassured the anxious parent, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from work that mattered. Is it normal for him to cry this much at night? The mother asked, dark circles under her eyes revealing the exhaustion that came with new parenthood. It can be, Cynthia said gently. Every baby is different, but let's go through some strategies that might help with his sleep routine. As she talked the mother through various soothing techniques, Cynthia realized she was drawing not just from her training, but from her own experience with Oliver. The long nights, the uncertainty, the constant worry about whether she was doing everything right, all of it had given her a perspective that couldn't be learned from textbooks. After the appointment, Dr. Chen pulled her aside. That was beautifully handled. The mother left here feeling supported rather than judged. That's a rare gift. I remember what it was like to feel like I was doing everything wrong, Cynthia replied. That evening, as she picked up Oliver from the daycare center at the clinic, Cynthia felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had built. Oliver, now almost a year old, toddled toward her with unsteady steps and threw his chubby arms around her legs. "Mama," he said clearly, and Cynthia's heart swelled with the pure joy of being the center of someone's universe. They walked home through the Denver streets as the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, Oliver chattering in his mixture of real words and made-up language, while Cynthia pointed out dogs and flowers and airplanes overhead. At home, as she prepared Oliver's dinner, her phone rang. Rebecca Martinez, her attorney. "Cynthia, I wanted to give you an update. Dominic's attorney reached out again about establishing visitation rights." Cynthia's hand stilled on the jar of baby food she was opening. "What kind of visitation?" "Nothing formal yet. I think he's testing the waters to see if you'd be open to some kind of arrangement." "What did you tell them?" "That any discussions would need to go through me and would require formal documentation. But Cynthia, at some point, you're going to have to decide how you want to handle Oliver's relationship with his father." After hanging up, Cynthia looked at Oliver, who was banging his spoon against his high chair tray with gleeful abandon. He had no idea that somewhere in Texas a man was trying to figure out how to be his father. To Oliver, family was simple. It was Cynthia and Aunt Melody, and the daycare teachers who knew his favorite songs, and the elderly neighbor who always waved at him from her window. "What do you think, baby boy?" she asked. "Should Mama let your daddy visit?" Oliver grinned and threw a piece of banana on the floor, which seemed like a perfectly reasonable response to an impossible question. Back in Dallas, Elizabeth was sitting across from James Whitmore at an intimate restaurant in Deep Ellum, listening to him explain why his marriage had become more of a business partnership than a romantic relationship. "Melissa and I, we've grown apart," James was saying, his hand moving dangerously close to Elizabeth's across the small table. "We're staying together for the girls, but there's no real connection anymore." Elizabeth nodded sympathetically, making the appropriate sounds of understanding while privately cataloging the similarities to every other married man she had ever targeted. They all said the same things. Their wives didn't understand them. Their marriages were over in all but name. They deserved to be happy. "That must be very lonely," she said. allowing her fingers to brush against his. It is. But talking to you, I feel like myself again. Like the man I was before life got so complicated. Elizabeth smiled, the expression warm and encouraging. Life doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's about finding someone who sees the real you. As James leaned closer, Elizabeth felt the familiar thrill of conquest. But beneath it, something else stirred. A small, unwelcome voice that whispered about teenage daughters who might discover their father's affair, about a yoga teacher wife who had done nothing wrong except marry a man who would betray her for the attention of a younger woman. Elizabeth pushed the thoughts away. She was good at compartmentalizing, at focusing on what she wanted rather than dwelling on the collateral damage her desires might cause. "Would you like to have dinner at my apartment this weekend?" she asked. "I make a mean pasta puttanesca." James's smile was answer enough. That night, as Elizabeth lay in her king-sized bed in her Dallas high-rise, she tried to recapture the excitement she had felt earlier in the evening. James was successful, attractive, and obviously interested. His wife was a safe distance away, and his business partners didn't know her history, but something felt different this time. Maybe it was the memory of Trevor's friends whispering about her reputation, or the image of that Houston Monthly reporter with her notepad full of questions. Maybe it was the realization that even in a new city, she was making the same choices that had led to her exile from Houston. Or maybe for the first time in her adult life, Elizabeth was beginning to understand that getting what she wanted wasn't the same thing as being happy. In Denver, Cynthia was reading Oliver a bedtime story about a little bear who got lost in the woods, but found his way home by following the North Star. As Oliver's breathing deepened into sleep, she reflected on the strange parallels between the story and her own life. She had gotten lost in a way, lost in a marriage that wasn't working, lost in trying to be the perfect wife to a man who didn't value what she offered. But like the little bear in the story, she had found her way to something better by following her own internal compass toward dignity and independence. Tomorrow she would consider Rebecca's question about Dominic's visitation request. She would weigh Oliver's potential need for a father against the risk of disrupting the peaceful life they had built together. But tonight, as she listened to her son's steady breathing and looked out at the Denver skyline twinkling in the distance, Cynthia felt the deep contentment that came from knowing she had chosen courage over convenience, uncertainty over settling for less than she deserved. Some stories ended with reconciliation and forgiveness. Others ended with new beginnings and the quiet satisfaction of a life built on your own terms. Cynthia was beginning to understand which kind of story hers was meant to be. Meanwhile, in his small Houston apartment, Dominic sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to draft a letter to the son he had never met. The words came slowly, inadequately. "Dear Oliver, I know I have no right to call myself your father." He crumpled up the page and started again. Some letters, he was learning, were easier to think about writing than to actually write. Some relationships required more than good intentions to repair, and some choices, once made, changed everything so fundamentally that finding the way back required more courage than he had ever been called upon to possess. 1 year and 8 months after Cynthia had left Houston, the city felt like a different planet as she stepped off the plane at Bush Intercontinental Airport. She carried Oliver, now an energetic toddler who pointed excitedly at the airplanes through the terminal windows, while her carry-on bag contained legal documents that would finally close this chapter of her life. "Mama, big," Oliver said, pressing his hands against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Yes, baby, very big," Cynthia agreed, though she was looking not at the planes but at the familiar Texas landscape that had once been home. Rebecca Martinez met them at baggage claim, embracing Cynthia warmly before kneeling to Oliver's level. "This must be the famous Oliver," Rebecca said. "He looks just like you." Oliver hid behind Cynthia's legs, suddenly shy in the presence of a stranger. At 19 months old, he was cautious around new people but fearless with everything else, a combination that kept Cynthia constantly alert. "How long do we have to be here?" Cynthia asked as they walked toward the parking garage. "The custody hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Judge Patterson is efficient, shouldn't take more than an hour. After that, you're free to go back to Denver." "And Dominic will be there?" "His attorney says yes." "Cynthia, are you prepared for this? Seeing him again?" Cynthia looked down at Oliver, who was now making airplane noises while clutching his small stuffed elephant. This confident, curious little boy was proof of everything she had accomplished since leaving Houston. He was healthy, happy, and secure in his knowledge that he was loved completely. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. That evening, In a downtown hotel room, Cynthia gave Oliver his bath while he played with travel-sized toys and babbled about the big birds they had seen at the airport. The routine was the same as it was every night in Denver. The same songs, the same silly voices she made while washing his hair, the same story about the little bear who found his way home. Consistency, she had learned, was one of the greatest gifts she could give him. Meanwhile, across town in his small apartment, Dominic was laying out his only remaining suit and trying to prepare himself for tomorrow's hearing. He hadn't seen Cynthia since the morning he had left for that final hotel room with Elizabeth, and he had never seen Oliver except in his imagination. His attorney, David Kim, had been honest about their chances. She's established a stable life in Colorado. He's never seen you. The judge is going to need compelling reasons to disrupt that arrangement. He's my son. Biology isn't enough anymore, Dominic. Parenting is about consistency, stability, and the child's best interests. What can you offer that he isn't already getting? Dominic had struggled to answer that question. He worked 60-hour weeks at a job that barely covered his rent. He lived in a one-bedroom apartment with furniture from Goodwill. He had no support system, no family nearby, no evidence that he could provide better care than what Oliver was already receiving. But he was the boy's father. That had to count for something. Across Dallas, Elizabeth was having dinner with James Whitmore at her apartment. The same pasta puttanesca she had promised weeks earlier. James had told his wife he was working late on a merger, a lie that came easier to him with each repetition. The girls will be at their mother's this weekend, James was saying as he refilled their wine glasses. We could drive up to my lake house, finally have some uninterrupted time together. Elizabeth smiled and nodded, but her attention kept drifting. Earlier that day, she had received a LinkedIn message from a former Houston colleague, mentioning that the Houston Monthly article about relationship patterns in the business community had been published. Her name wasn't mentioned specifically, but anyone who knew the details would understand exactly who the article was discussing. Elizabeth, did you hear what I said? Sorry, yes. The lake house sounds wonderful. But even as she said it, Elizabeth felt a familiar restlessness. The thrill of the pursuit was fading, replaced by the mundane reality of maintaining an affair with a man who talked constantly about his problems, but showed no real intention of solving them. James's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with the guilty expression of someone who knew he should ignore it, but couldn't resist checking. It's Melissa, he said. The girls are fighting about something. I should probably, of course, take it. As James stepped onto the balcony to call his wife, Elizabeth looked around her perfectly appointed apartment and wondered when winning had started to feel so much like losing. The next morning, the Travis County family court was surprisingly small and informal. Cynthia sat with Rebecca at one table while Dominic and his attorney occupied another. The distance between them felt both vast and insignificant. They were close enough to make eye contact, but separated by choices that couldn't be undone. Oliver sat on Cynthia's lap, occasionally babbling or pointing at the ceiling fan that fascinated him. He was dressed in a tiny collared shirt and khakis that made him look impossibly grown up and heartbreakingly young at the same time. Judge Patricia Patterson, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the case files before looking up. This is a petition for visitation rights filed by Mr. Dominic Harris regarding his biological son, Oliver James Harris. Mrs. Harris, you're not contesting paternity? No, Your Honor, Cynthia said quietly. And Mr. Harris, you're seeking what specific arrangement? Dominic's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client is seeking reasonable visitation rights, potentially beginning with supervised visits that could evolve into overnight stays as the child becomes more comfortable. Mrs. Harris, what is your position? Rebecca stood. Your Honor, my client is not opposed to Mr. Harris having a relationship with his son, but she has serious concerns about disrupting the child's established routine and stability. Judge Patterson looked at Oliver, who was now trying to grab the water pitcher on the table. How old is the child? 19 months, Your Honor, Cynthia answered. And Mr. Harris, how much time have you spent with your son? None, Your Honor, Dominic said quietly. By choice or circumstance? Dominic glanced at Cynthia, then back at the judge. Your Honor, when my wife left Houston, she didn't tell me where she was going. I've been trying to establish contact through legal channels. Mrs. Harris, why did you relocate without informing Mr. Harris of your whereabouts? Cynthia stood, Oliver still in her arms. Your Honor, my marriage ended due to my husband's infidelity. I was 8 months pregnant when I discovered his affair, and I felt that the best thing for my unborn child was to establish a stable environment away from that situation. And you felt that required complete separation from the father? I felt it required protecting myself and my child from further emotional harm, yes. Judge Patterson made notes, then looked at both parties. Mr. Harris, what has changed in your life since your son was born that makes you believe you're prepared to be a consistent presence in his life? Dominic looked at Oliver, who was now reaching toward a shaft of sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows. The boy's dark eyes, so much like Cynthia's, held no recognition, no awareness that the man across the room was supposed to mean something to him. Your Honor, I've learned from my mistakes. I understand now what I lost, what I threw away. I want the chance to be the father he deserves. And Mrs. Harris, what are your specific concerns about visitation? Cynthia took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Your Honor, Oliver has never known any parent except me. He has routines, attachments, and a stable environment in Colorado. I'm not opposed to Mr. Harris having a relationship with him, but I think any arrangement needs to prioritize Oliver's emotional security over anyone else's desires. Judge Patterson nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Harris, where do you currently live? Houston, Your Honor. I have an apartment and a steady job. 1-bedroom apartment, Rebecca interjected. No space for a child to stay overnight. And Mrs. Harris, you live in Denver? Yes, Your Honor. I have a 2-bedroom apartment, stable employment, and a support system that includes my sister and the daycare staff at my workplace. The judge looked at Oliver again, who was now playing peekaboo with Cynthia's hair, giggling each time his face disappeared and reappeared. I'm going to order supervised visitation to begin in 6 months, Judge Patterson said finally. Mr. Harris, this will give you time to establish appropriate housing and demonstrate consistency. Mrs. Harris, this will give you time to prepare Oliver for the concept of having a father figure in his life. She looked sternly at both parents. This child's welfare is my only concern. I don't care about your marriage, your divorce, or your hurt feelings. I care about what's best for Oliver. You'll work with a family counselor to develop an appropriate introduction schedule, and we'll reconvene in 1 year to assess how the arrangement is working. As they left the courthouse, Cynthia felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. 6 months would give her time to prepare Oliver gradually, but it also meant that the clean separation she had maintained was ending. Are you okay? Rebecca asked as they reached the parking lot. I think so. It's fair. Difficult, but fair. Behind them, Dominic watched as Cynthia buckled Oliver into a car seat, a routine so natural and practiced that it highlighted how absent he had been from every moment of his son's life. Oliver looked back through the car window as they drove away, not at Dominic, but at the interesting shadows the buildings made on the pavement. To him, the man standing in the courthouse parking lot was just another stranger in a world full of strangers. Dominic understood with sudden clarity that fatherhood wasn't something that could be claimed. It had to be earned day by day, moment by moment, through the kind of consistent love and attention that he had never learned to give. 6 months later in Denver, Cynthia was preparing Oliver for his first supervised visit with Dominic. She had worked with a child psychologist to introduce the concept gradually, reading books about fathers, showing Oliver pictures, talking about the man who lived far away but wanted to meet him. Daddy, Oliver said, pointing to a photo that Cynthia had printed from Facebook. That's right, baby. Daddy is coming to visit you today. Oliver studied the picture with the serious concentration he applied to everything new. At 2 years old, he was talking in complete sentences and had developed strong opinions about everything from which socks to wear to whether dinosaurs were better than trains. Daddy nice? He asked. Daddy is trying to be nice, Cynthia said carefully. The meeting took place at a family center in downtown Denver, with a social worker present to ensure Oliver's comfort. Dominic had flown in the night before and spent the morning walking around the city, marveling at the mountains that surrounded his son's new home. When Oliver saw Dominic for the first time, he hid behind Cynthia's legs, his standard response to strangers. But after 20 minutes of patient interaction, he was willing to sit across from Dominic at a small table and stack blocks together. He's beautiful, Dominic told Cynthia as Oliver concentrated on building a tower that would inevitably fall down. He's smart too. And funny, and stubborn, like his mother. They watched Oliver knock down his tower and clapped delightedly at the destruction he had caused. Dominic, Cynthia said quietly, I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishing you or rewarding you. This is about Oliver. If you're going to be in his life, you have to be all the way in. No halfway commitments, no deciding it's too hard when he's going through a difficult phase. I understand. Do you? Because loving a child isn't like the kind of love you thought you wanted from Elizabeth. It's not exciting or dramatic or validating. It's getting up at 3 a.m. when he has a fever. It's reading the same book 47 times. It's putting his needs ahead of your convenience every single time. Dominic looked at Oliver, who was now trying to feed blocks to his stuffed elephant. I want to learn. Then learn. But learn because you want to be his father, not because you feel guilty about missing his first 2 years. 6 months later in Dallas, Elizabeth was packing again. The affair with James Whitmore had ended as these things always did, messily, with hurt feelings and threats and the uncomfortable realization that she had become someone she didn't particularly like. James's wife had discovered the affair through a credit card statement that showed repeated charges at the same restaurant. The confrontation had been devastating for everyone involved, including James's teenage daughters who had stopped speaking to their father entirely. Elizabeth told herself it wasn't her fault. James had made his own choices, told his own lies, betrayed his own family, but for the first time, she found it difficult to maintain that position. She kept remembering the last conversation she'd had with James when he'd broken down crying about how his 16-year-old daughter had called him pathetic, and his 14-year-old wouldn't even look at him. "They hate me," he had sobbed. "My own kids hate me, and I can't blame them." Elizabeth had tried to comfort him, to remind him that teenage girls were dramatic, that they would forgive him eventually. But even as she said the words, she realized she was watching a man discover the true cost of choices that had seemed so simple when they were making them together. Now, with another job search ahead of her and another city to explore, Elizabeth found herself wondering if this cycle would ever end, if she would ever find a relationship that didn't require destroying someone else's, if she would ever be the kind of person who built things instead of taking them. The questions followed her as she loaded boxes into her car and prepared to drive toward whatever came next. Some patterns, she was beginning to understand, were harder to break than others, and some required more honesty than she had ever been willing to embrace. In Denver, Cynthia was reading Oliver his bedtime story, the same one about the little bear who found his way home by following the North Star. But tonight, the story had a small addition. "And when the little bear got home," Cynthia read, "he found his mama waiting for him. And sometimes when the weather was nice, his daddy would come visit and they would look at the stars together." "Daddy visit again?" Oliver asked sleepily. "Yes, baby. Daddy will visit again." As Oliver's breathing deepened into sleep, Cynthia reflected on how completely their lives had changed since that night she had packed a single suitcase and fled Houston. She had built a career, a home, and a family structure that prioritized peace over drama, consistency over excitement. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the life she had chosen when her original plan fell apart. And sometimes, she thought as she listened to the mountain wind outside Oliver's window, the unplanned lives turned out to be the most authentic ones. Some stories ended with grand reconciliations and dramatic forgiveness. Others ended with small daily choices to prioritize love over ego, growth over comfort, truth over convenience. This story, Cynthia knew as she turned off Oliver's bedtime light, was ending exactly as it should, not with fireworks and music, but with the quiet satisfaction of a woman and child who had found their way home to each other and discovered that home was something you could build anywhere, as long as you built it on solid ground. The end. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.
Single mother helped a homeless man unaware. He is a billionaire. What he did. Shocker rain poured relentlessly that night in Lagos. A single mother named Amara, exhausted from a double shift at the restaurant, clutched her umbrella as thunder cracked above. On her way home, she spotted a shivering homeless man curled under a broken kiosk, his clothes soaked, his eyes hollow, yet strangely calm. Despite barely having enough for herself and her little boy, she handed him her only food and offered shelter in her small apartment. The man, unkempt, quiet, with an oddly dignified posture, hesitated before accepting, whispering a soft "thank you" that carried weight beyond poverty. As days passed, Amara noticed the man's intelligence, the way he spoke about business and people with insight no ordinary drifter had. But she brushed it off. Who could a homeless man really be? Until one morning, sleek black SUVs stopped outside her apartment. Men in suits stepped out, bowing slightly to him. Who was this man she'd taken in? Why did billionaires suddenly treat her like royalty? And what was he about to do that would change her life forever? The small room smelled faintly of kerosene and wet clothes. Amara's son, David, only 6, peeked nervously from behind the curtain, clutching his worn teddy bear. The stranger sat on the edge of the couch, his trembling hands cupped around the mug of hot Gary water she'd offered. His voice, when he finally spoke, was gentle but carried a strange authority. "You shouldn't have brought me in. The world is not kind to people like you." Amara smiled faintly, pushing a blanket toward him. "Neither is it kind to people like you," she said. Her words carried no pity, just quiet strength. He looked at her, as if seeing something he hadn't seen in years, dignity in the middle of struggle. Outside, thunder rolled again. That night's sleep eluded her. The man's calm voice echoed in her mind. When he'd thanked her earlier, there was a weight behind it, a kind of gratitude that didn't fit a man with nothing. The way he observed everything, the broken fan, the crack on the wall, the pot on the stove, felt like a man who once owned things, not one who begged. By morning she found him awake, cleaning the floor with her mop as if he belonged there. "You didn't have to," she said. He shrugged. "It's the least I can do." "What's your name?" "Amara," she replied. "And yours?" He hesitated for a long second. "Daniel," he finally said. She noticed he didn't flinch or fidget when he lied. His calmness was almost trained. Later that day, while she dressed David for school, she caught Daniel watching her with quiet curiosity. "You work too much," he murmured. She laughed lightly. "You talk like a man who's never been broke." He smiled, not offended, just amused. "You'd be surprised," he said softly. The tone made her pause. There was history in his voice, one that didn't match the threadbare shirt he wore. That afternoon, she left him at home to rest while she worked her double shift at the restaurant. Yet all through the day, she couldn't shake the feeling she'd invited someone extraordinary into her home. Her co-workers teased her, saying she was too kind for her own good. "One day that kindness will break your heart," her manager warned. But kindness was all she had left. When she returned that night, the house was spotless. Her son was asleep, his homework done, and Daniel was quietly fixing the faulty bulb in the corridor, using tools she didn't even own. "Where did you get that screwdriver?" she asked. "Borrowed it from the neighbor," he said without looking back. Amara watched him work under the flickering light, his focus, the precision of his hands, the unspoken discipline in every move. He wasn't just a man used to work, he was a man used to order. She opened her mouth to ask the question that had been haunting her, but before she could, he turned slightly and said, "You shouldn't trust strangers so easily." She froze. "Should I not trust you then?" He didn't answer, just looked at her with eyes that carried both gratitude and guilt. Something in her chest stirred, a mix of fear and fascination. Who exactly had she let into her home? Days turned into weeks, and Daniel became part of the small apartment's rhythm. He walked David to school, helped fix things Amara couldn't afford to replace, and quietly cooked when she came home too tired to lift her hands. But something about him didn't add up. His posture was too straight, his silence too studied. He spoke with the kind of restraint only people with power once had. One afternoon, Amara came home early. She found Daniel reading an old newspaper on her couch, his brow furrowed over the business section. "You read a lot," she teased, dropping her bag. "You plan on starting a company from the couch?" He smiled faintly, eyes never leaving the page. "Sometimes broken things need a plan before they can stand again." His words were simple, yet they sank deep. There was pain behind them, like a man who'd lost everything he once built. That night, she couldn't sleep again. She replayed his tone, his calm, the way he looked out the window as if watching ghosts of another life. Who was he before this? The next morning, something strange happened. While Amara was preparing David's lunch, she saw Daniel step outside to take a call. His voice was low, controlled, but one line sliced through the morning air. "No, I said the merger must not proceed until I sign it myself." He froze when he realized she was standing there. He ended the call slowly, his expression unreadable. "Old friends," he muttered. "Friends who talk about mergers?" she asked, crossing her arms. He chuckled, deflecting. "You overheard wrong." But she hadn't. The curiosity gnawed at her like hunger. Every time she caught him staring at nothing, lost in thought, she wondered, was he running from something or toward something? One evening, David asked him to help with math homework. Daniel explained it like a professor, clear, calm, patient. When the boy finished, Daniel patted his head and said, "You're going to be a great man someday." Amara smiled softly, but Daniel's gaze lingered too long on the boy, almost like he saw someone he once was. Later, as Amara washed dishes, Daniel stood by the door, hesitant. "You've been kind to me," he said. "You didn't ask who I was." "Why?" She wiped her hands and looked up at him. "Because I know what it feels like to have no one believe in you." For a moment, something cracked in his calm mask. He turned away before she could read it. That night, she heard him whispering again in the living room, this time in anger. "Tell them I'll handle it my way." His tone was cold, commanding, not that of a man sleeping under kiosks. The next morning, her neighbor pulled her aside. "That man staying with you, I saw him get into a black SUV last night. Men in suits. They called him Sir Daniel. Who is he?" Amara froze. Her spoon slipped from her hand. "SUV? Men in suits?" "You must be mistaken," she said, heart racing. But as she turned toward the house, she saw him standing by the window, staring at her like he'd heard every word. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she'd saved him or invited danger into her life. Amara's heart pounded as Daniel's eyes met hers through the window. That calm, mysterious gaze, once comforting, now felt heavy with secrets. She forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong. But inside, questions screamed louder than the thunder that night. Who was this man who spoke like a CEO, yet slept on her couch like a wanderer? The following morning, she noticed something new. The torn bag he carried when she met him was gone. In its place, a sleek black duffel sat by the door, made of genuine leather. She frowned. "Where did you get that?" He looked up unbothered. "A friend dropped it off." The same kind of friend who drove SUVs? Conflict pulsed between them in the air. Amara tried to act normal, but every time she caught him staring at her son with quiet affection or taking phone calls in hushed tones, the pit in her stomach deepened. One night, curiosity won. While he stepped out to buy bread, she opened the duffel. Inside were neatly folded shirts, tailored, expensive fabric, and a wristwatch that gleamed like a small sun. She gasped. On the inner clasp, engraved initials, D.K. Williams. She'd seen that name before, on newspapers, in business news about a billionaire who'd vanished after a corporate scandal. Her hands shook as she held the watch. Could Daniel be that Williams? The front door creaked. She stuffed the watch back, heart racing. Daniel entered, eyes scanning the room too quickly, too carefully. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. She nodded too fast. "Just tired." He smiled faintly. "You should rest. Tomorrow might change everything." His words sent chills through her. Tomorrow? What was happening tomorrow? That night, Amara barely slept. She replayed every interaction, every soft word, every mysterious call. By dawn, she made up her mind. She would confront him. But when she woke, the duffel was gone. The couch was empty. Panic clawed her chest. He was gone. Just like that. She ran outside barefoot, scanning the street, but he'd vanished like he'd never existed. As she stood trembling on the sidewalk, a car horn startled her. A glossy black SUV rolled to a stop beside her. The window slid down, revealing Daniel inside, clean-shaven, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. The transformation was unreal. "Get in," he said quietly. Amara froze. "What's happening, Daniel?" His gaze softened. "Please, you deserve to know the truth." Every instinct screamed not to, but curiosity drowned fear. She climbed in. The car glided through the street silently, passing neighborhoods she'd never seen. He didn't speak. He just stared out the window, face unreadable. Finally, he turned to her and said, "You helped a stranger, but you didn't just save a man. You saved a legacy." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He looked ahead as the car turned into a massive gated estate, guards saluting. "I'm about to show you who you really helped, Amara." The gates opened like the doors of another world. Amara's eyes widened as the SUV rolled into a sprawling mansion, lined with marble fountains and palm trees glowing under soft golden lights. The same man she once fed Gary sat beside her, his wristwatch gleaming, his voice now calm but commanding, as guards greeted him with, "Welcome back, Sir Daniel." Her heart thudded like thunder in her chest. "Sir Daniel?" she whispered. He glanced at her, expression unreadable. "My real name is Daniel Kingsley Williams," he said quietly. "I own this estate, and a few others." Amara's breath caught. Billionaire. The man the newspapers called the ghost of Lagos business. The one who vanished after a power struggle in his company, rumored dead. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You lived under a kiosk." He smiled faintly, pain flashing in his eyes. "After my board betrayed me, I walked away from everything to see if people still cared about humans, not status. For years I searched for sincerity in a world that only bowed to wealth, and then I met you." Her throat tightened. "You mean you were testing people?" "No," he said softly. "I was searching for truth. You found me when I was at my lowest. You fed me when I couldn't even feed myself. That's something no amount of money can buy." The SUV stopped before the mansion steps. The front door opened, revealing a woman in a tailored suit, his assistant perhaps, who bowed respectfully. "Welcome back, sir. The board is waiting." Amara froze. Board? Her mind raced. The man she'd housed on her couch was about to walk into a board meeting in a palace. He turned to her gently. "You'll wait here. Please, I won't be long." When he left, she stood there, surrounded by luxury that didn't belong to her. Marble floors, chandeliers like constellations. She felt small, almost invisible. Then curiosity got the better of her. She walked down a corridor lined with portraits, each one showing Daniel in sharp suits beside presidents, CEOs, and international figures. The scale of who he really was hit her like a storm. In one of the photos, he stood beside a woman and a boy. The woman, graceful, cold-eyed, had a beauty that carried authority. The boy looked about 8. A family? Suddenly, a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be in here." She turned to see the woman from the photo standing in the hallway, her heels clicking sharply. "And who are you?" Amara stammered. I'm just a friend." The woman's lips curved, amused. "A friend? My husband brings home strays now?" Her words sliced deep. Amara froze. "Husband?" The woman smiled wider. "Yes, Daniel Williams is my husband." The room seemed to tilt. Her hands went cold. From down the corridor, Daniel appeared, voice low and tense. "Sophia, enough!" Sophia turned, her tone dripping venom. "Enough? You disappeared for months, Daniel, and now you bring her here?" Amara's heart stopped. Betrayal hung in the air like poison. Who exactly was Daniel? A lost soul she saved, or a man whose lies had just shattered her world? The air in the hallway was sharp enough to slice through silence. Amara stood frozen, staring between Daniel and Sophia. Every second stretched like a lifetime. Daniel looked cornered, Sophia looked triumphant, and Amara, she just looked betrayed. "You're married." Amara's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel exhaled slowly, his tone careful. "It's not what you think." Sophia laughed bitterly. "Oh, it's exactly what she thinks. My husband disappears for months and turns up with a single mother who saved him. How poetic." She stepped closer, eyes glinting. "Tell me, Amara, how much did he promise you for this little act of compassion?" Amara flinched, cheeks burning. "I didn't know who he was. I only helped him because you thought he was poor?" Sophia cut in, her voice slicing like glass. "How generous," Daniel's voice cracked through the tension. "Enough, Sophia." His command froze the air, but Sophia only smirked. "You always did like your experiments, Daniel. Disappearing for months to test humanity, and now you bring home a charity case to prove your point?" Amara's stomach twisted. Test humanity? Was that all she was? A test? He turned to her, his eyes pained. "Amara, please listen. I left that world because it was corrupt, soulless. I wanted to see if kindness still existed without the scent of money. You proved it does." Her chest tightened. "Then why does it feel like I was part of your experiment? He took a step closer. Because you weren't. His voice broke, raw and desperate. You're the first person who saw me. Not my title, not my money. Me. Sophia scoffed. Spare her the drama, Daniel. The board's waiting, and your little fairy tale's over. But Daniel didn't move. He reached for Amara's hand, his voice trembling. When I lost everything, when the company turned against me, I thought my life was over. You gave me hope again. You reminded me what it means to be human. Amara's eyes glistened, torn between disbelief and something deeper. And now what? You return to your world, and I go back to mine. He hesitated. That silence was her answer. Sophia smiled thinly. Exactly. You don't belong here, sweetheart. The humiliation hit like cold water. Amara pulled her hand free, her voice trembling but fierce. You're right, I don't. She turned toward the door, fighting tears. Daniel called after her, voice breaking. Amara, wait! She stopped just long enough to look back. I helped you because it was right, Daniel. Not because of who you are. Don't ever confuse pity with love. And she walked out into the night, her reflection vanishing against the mansion's glass doors, leaving Daniel standing between two worlds, realizing too late which one had his soul. The guards exchanged uneasy glances as the gates shut behind her. Daniel didn't move. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. Inside, Sophia whispered, Now you see, Daniel. The poor don't stay in our world. But his silence wasn't defeat. It was the sound of a man about to change everything. Weeks passed. Lagos moved on, but Amara couldn't. Every time she passed the kiosk where she'd first met Daniel, the memory returned like a ghost. She'd gone back to working double shifts, her heart heavier than her tray. David asked about him sometimes. Mom, will Mr. Daniel visit again? But she just smiled weakly. He's gone, sweetheart. One afternoon, while she was serving customers at the restaurant, 2 black SUVs stopped outside. Her co-workers gasped. Men in suits stepped out again, polished, confident, out of place in the cramped street. The restaurant fell silent as one of them approached her. Miss Amara Ease. She froze. Yes? He handed her a sealed envelope embossed with a gold insignia. KW Holdings. Her heart nearly stopped. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a short handwritten note. You taught me that wealth means nothing without humanity. You once gave me food when I had nothing. Allow me to return that kindness. Daniel. Folded beneath the note was a document, a property deed. Confused, she looked closer. It was for a fully furnished apartment in Lekki. Her rent-free home, her name printed in bold. Is this some kind of joke? She whispered. The man smiled politely. No, ma'am. The apartment keys are in the car. Mr. Williams insisted it be delivered personally. Her hands shook. Customers gathered around, murmuring. Tears blurred her vision. He remembered. But that wasn't all. Inside the envelope was another letter addressed to David Ease. For the boy who reminded me of who I once was, a full scholarship through university, so he'll never have to sleep under kiosks as I did. D. Amara covered her mouth, tears falling freely. He did this? The man nodded. He asked me to tell you he's left Lagos for good, but he wanted you to know you changed his life. Her knees nearly gave out. The restaurant was silent, everyone watching as she clutched the letter to her chest. In that moment, the man she thought she'd lost had given her more than money. He'd restored her faith in something far greater. That evening, she and David rode in the SUV to their new home. The apartment overlooked the ocean. It was beautiful. Too beautiful for someone who'd lived her whole life counting coins. On the dining table sat a small box with her name on it. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a raindrop, engraved with the words, "For the night you brought light to the rain." Her tears fell onto the pendant. She looked out at the ocean, whispering, "Daniel, wherever you are, thank you." Far away in a private jet cutting across the clouds, Daniel watched the city fade beneath him. He closed his eyes, a faint smile on his lips, whispering, "Goodbye, Amara." For once, the billionaire who'd lost everything felt truly rich again, and in the heart of Lagos, A single mother who once gave all she had realized she had just been repaid in ways she never imagined.